This is a talk on primarily about the Gradle build system as applied to Android. I've been using Gradle for years. I've spent a lot of time with it on my Groovy-related projects, and of course now that includes Grails-related projects as well. Oh, I hooked that. All right. Well, all right. Never mind. Sorry about that. Any rate, one of the big changes to Android is that they moved away from what we used to call an IDE build and moved into an actual build system. Now, from the beginning, Android has supported Ant builds, which gives you an idea how old that is. In fact, if you've done a lot of Android development, it feels very much like when it first came out, like we'd gone back in time, back to the late 90s or something. The metaphors, the idioms, everything, the way it was done, all felt like it was back from then. And they've been gradually bringing things up to date. And one of the big changes at Google I/O in 2013 was the announcement of the move to the Gradle build system for the build itself. So there were efforts along the way to do something that was, that was Maven related, and eventually, but nothing was ever officially supported on that, even though there were various plugins. The first official move to a separate build tool was the one for Gradle, and that's what we have now. And that has been evolving over the past couple of years rather intensively. At the same time that was announced, they also announced the move to the Android Studio IDE. Prior to that, Android development had all been pretty much done under an Eclipse variation that had a plugin called ADT, the Android Developer Tools. And I have to admit that, frankly, I think it was a better Eclipse than Eclipse in many ways. As Eclipse has gotten larger and more awkward, unstable, buggy, or whatever. Now, I'm saying that, and I'm being a little bit harsh. Eclipse is still widely used throughout the Java industry, and it's very good. But as I say, I spent a lot of time in the Groovy and Grails ecosystems, and the Eclipse support in there has gotten progressively worse over the past couple of years for a variety of understandable reasons. But nevertheless, that's colored my perceptions of it. Whereas the IntelliJ people, the JetBrains people working on IntelliJ, have done a wonderful job with the Groovy and Grails support, and that includes Gradle. So when they finally moved the IDE from Eclipse ADT into Android Studio, which is a free, scaled-down version of IntelliJ, it turns out to have been a very, very good thing. I didn't know at the time how good it was going to be, although most of my friends who used IntelliJ kept saying, no, you're going to be very happy. Pardon me. I'd owned one, but I'd been an Eclipse user for like 13 years or something, So when it failed, I generally knew where. And there's no denying there's a pretty substantial learning curve in moving into IntelliJ. But once that happened, that was the final trigger for me. So I've been an IntelliJ user pretty steadily for maybe a year and a half, something like that. So I still get into knots where I don't know how to fix something, but at least I'm productive using it, and I agree. I'm very happy. I never want to go back from that. I'm going to show you both of those things. Now, last year I made a very similar presentation and covered a lot of the same topics. I'm going to try to update that and talk about more recent developments here, but for the people who were did not see last year's talk or were not interested in last year's talk and who happen to be interested now, I do want to start with the basics, but I'm not going to spend too much time on the fundamentals of Android itself. I'll show you the basics in there, but then I want to move on to the Gradle build system, and that's where I want to focus primarily. The big points I want to hit before the end, just so I have them in my own head and hopefully I won't forget them as well for you, is that I want to show you how the basic build structure looks. I want to show you what needs to be done in order to make a release build and how the Gradle plugin handles that. I want to show you testing, both unit testing and what we would pretty much typically call integration testing, with two different mechanisms. One is the classic Robotium library, which is still very nice, but not, again, officially supported. It's a separate plugin. And then I have updated my test to use something that is from Google and will be pretty much the de facto in the future, is the Espresso library. Although I have to say I'm not real good at it, but I can show you the basics. on that one, how that works. And then I also want to show you an example with product flavors in it, which is a really neat feature. I have some things about build types, but honestly, build types don't feel all that different when you use them. I mean, it's basically the same app, just whether it's being a debug version or release version. So that's where I'll talk about the signing key and everything. But the testing is really cool. Okay, so I have some slides. The slides that were uploaded to the website are the old ones, unfortunately. I'm going to upload this as soon as we're done this talk. My own marketing I have to do. My name's Ken Cousin. It's Cousin like the relative. Just doesn't look like it. We think it's an Ellis Island job or something. You know, nobody knows what it was in the old country. Any rate, there's my email address. My company's CousinIT.com or Cousin IT Inc. My wife says Cousin It, like the Addams Family. You know, it was her idea. There's my Twitter handle. I spent a lot of time in the Groovy world writing this book called Making Java Groovy. If nothing else, let me give you some benefit for coming to this talk. For any book at Manning, if you get it at manning.com, use the coupon code, my last name, KOUSEN, and the number 37 after it, and that'll give you a 37% discount on anything at Manning, as long as you buy my book. No, I can't. No, that's not true, actually. You don't have to buy mine, but anything else, MEEPs, any of them, the Manning, or pardon me, the Early Access Program, all of the, pardon me, all of those will be a 37% discount. You can try Cousin 85 and see if that'll work. I don't know. But if you really think it through, you try Cousin 105 and see if they pay you to take it away, right? Yeah. Also, I'm working on a book called Gradle for Android for O'Reilly that will be about the Gradle plugin for Android. That book I've had to rip apart and restart half a dozen times because Android keeps changing, and Android Studio keeps changing, and Gradle plugin keeps changing, and Gradle keeps changing. So at some point, I'm just going to go, oh, the heck with it, and just write it, and it is what it is. In the meantime, I've recorded some videos for O'Reilly, video courses. These 3 are now available as of actually today. The Groovy Programming Fundamentals, Practical Groovy, and Mastering Groovy. If you have a Safari account, they are available through Safari. If not now, then soon. They'll all be out. And this week, I actually recorded a couple of video courses on Android development itself. Expect those within the next month or so. We'll see how that goes. It turns out that when you record 6 to 10 hours of video, to my surprise, in order to review all that, takes at least 6 to 10 hours. Really annoying. I don't know why that didn't occur to me, but nevertheless. Okay, so at any rate, all the stuff you want to know about Android comes from the homepage, developer.android.com. And I believe I have that page open already. Wow, I think I have enough windows open. This is let me actually go to developer.android.com. Of course, they're talking about the mDeveloper preview. And if you open up the SDK manager, it actually is labeled MNC, leading most people to speculate that MNC stands for Macadamia Nut Cookie. And I was just talking to Zav about that, Xavier Ducrohet. I know I'm not pronouncing that well, but I'm trying. I mean, he's the head of the Android plugin project. He's talked here already, and he's also the head of the Android Studio project. He informs me that the M preview, the preview versions also have names, so that while they're referring to it as Macadamia Nut Cookie in the M preview, when they actually release M in the fall, it probably will be called something else. I don't know, Melon, M&M. I'm looking for funny alternatives to that. I thought Macadamia Nut Cookie was the funny one. At any rate, this is the developer.android.com site, and if you go to the develop link, then of course the first thing they bring up is Android Studio, and that is the definitive tool now for building Android applications. So there's a lot of information here. There's even something about the Gradle build tools as well. The best thing about this site, by the way, by far, is this little magnifying glass up here, because by golly, if there's one thing Google knows how to do, it's search, okay? So if I was to say, Studio, or actually, why don't I say Gradle, you see they already talk right here about the Android plugin for Gradle and have some discussions about the entries and signing and ProGuard and testing and on and on and on. The only problem with this site is that it is not updated nearly as often as the plugin is updated. There is also a site, if you Google Android new build system, okay, this is the site that has the latest information in it. Although again, if you were to go into the plugin user guide, that's seriously out of date. Of course, that's why I have a contract to write a book, probably. But there is a link here called Recent Changes, and that one will tell you the latest and greatest of what's going on with the tool and the plugin and everything else. So I very much recommend those sites in order to keep track of things. If you don't watch those sites, then believe it or not, you'll actually have to go to, and I know this is hard to imagine, Google+. You'll actually have a reason to go to Google+. Now, I know that was a little overly sarcastic, but nevertheless, that's the idea. All right, now let me actually go build something. Here is Android Studio. Let me close this particular project, because I'm going to run through 2 or 3 of them. But I want to show you the process of building a brand new project, and then I'm going to abandon it pretty quickly, but I want to show you the generated Gradle build files so you have an idea what they look like. So, by the way, if you have been working with the Eclipse ADT tools and it's time to move over, they have an excellent import wizard. You don't have to, see what used to happen is you would go to your Eclipse project and then there's under an export menu, there was generate Gradle build file. And it would generate the Gradle build file based on the dependencies you'd set up and the mappings and everything. But the project structure changes when you move to Android Studio. And now, this understands how to read the existing Eclipse projects and will do all the conversions for you and move the directories around and everything. The only downside to this, or something to be aware of, is it's a one-way change. You're not going back. You know, if either the whole team has to move to the project structure or I wouldn't do it at all. And frankly, I'd say that the stability is such that it's definitely worth moving at this point. A year ago, you could argue that we weren't quite ready yet. Now, most of the serious Android developers I know are quite happy with Android Studio, or let's say at least as happy with Android Studio as they are with Eclipse. Plus, Android Studio understands the Gradle build and does all these extra features that Eclipse still does not really support. Now, they're going to be changing that. They're going to be working on the Eclipse part too, but I still think it's time to move over. So I have imported a few dozen projects under this import wizard, and with very minor exceptions, everything has gone immediately without a problem. Gone beautifully. So I have not had any major issues with that. I haven't tried things that used in-depth Google Play services and odd stuff, but if I just have a list of dependencies and basic projects, everything's imported without a problem. So let me start with a new Android Studio project, and I'll call it, you know, Hello Android, and let's change the package here to Gradle.com, even though I don't work for Gradle. Still want to call them Gradleware. I desperately want to say that, but I'll call it Gradle. I do not yet have a picture of the elephant in my slides. You know, does that elephant have a name yet? I mean, I've heard people referring to it as an angry Gradlefant or whatever. I mean, it looks angry, doesn't it? Even though it's build happiness, you know, and the bird looks happy. I'll give him that, right? So I was thinking you can't use the name Horton, right? That's kind of taken for elephants, but you could therefore use Tim. As the Canadians would enjoy that joke. It's a Tim Hortons kind of thing. No? All right. At any rate, it was just a thought. All right, moving on. So when I hit next here, then you choose which platform you're targeting. And notice that over these years, we no longer really make a distinction between phone and tablet anymore. In the Honeycomb release, then that was the first one designed specifically for tablets, and we had the action bar added, and we had fragments added and everything like that. Nowadays, the phones are sufficiently big, there's not really a significant distinction there. Android Wear, I imagine, they do support the development in Android Studio, and I think that's going to get bigger over the next year or so. I do know one person with an Android TV, but there's only one. Android Auto, I also expect maybe in the next year or two might become much bigger, but right now you could probably wait a little bit. And if you're developing for Google Glass, well, sorry, you know. Although my thought about Google Glass is that Google Glass is version 1. Version 1000 is an Iron Man suit, right? And who doesn't want an Iron Man suit? So, but at any rate, I think you can not worry about that at this point. So if I click on next, and then it wants to generate some kind of activity for your application when you first build it. And I'll just pick blank activity. Any of these work, but again, I'm going to create this app and abandon it, so it doesn't really matter. I'll say next, and they want to, by default, call it main activity, and that's perfectly fine. The XML layout name will be activity_main. The title, I've never actually figured out what that's used for. I don't really care. And then there's a menu resource as well. And now I'll just hit finish, and it's going to generate the project, and then we'll start taking a look at the pieces here. Now, the first thing to notice, I'm going to assume all of you are reasonably comfortable with Gradle. I mean, you're at least familiar with that. If you're at a Gradle conference, you probably have some familiarity. So I don't need to explain any of the Gradle stuff to you. So the first thing I want to point out is that Android apps come up as a multi-project Gradle build right from the beginning. Now, it's not easy to see it here because this particular layout is in an Android form, and that's restricting it in a nice way that's helpful when you know where all the pieces are. But I'm going to switch to the project view, and that way I can see everything the way it maps to the disk. So if I want to see this now, here is a build.gradle file, and there's also a settings.gradle file, the normal way you make a Gradle multi-project build. So they refer to an app folder by default, and that's where the actual app is. So they have a top-level project that defines what we'll see is where to get the plugin, and then this folder, this file, which will tell you which individual subfolders are subprojects. Now they start with this one. If you use any Android library projects, and there's a way to add a module here, it'll automatically add the library project as another subfolder underneath this one. If you use an AAR, you ever heard of those? R's, yeah, right? Like there's jars and wars and ears, and AAR is an Android archive. That too is a sub-project in this space. So at any rate, that's enough with the settings file. Here is the top level dependency. You make that full screen. I can make that a bit bigger too if necessary. And you see that they start off with a build script tag. So the build script tag, again, for those who don't use it a lot, the purpose of that is to be able to download the plugin for Gradle. Now, Gradle itself comes with a wide variety of plugins, but it's very common now to have a build script tag to download additional plugins when needed. So in other words, the user doesn't have to go and download one and add it to Gradle. You just have a build script which downloads it automatically. Where is it downloaded? By default, they picked JCenter. Used to be Maven Central. Now it's JCenter. Maven Central still works. The dependency, the group ID is com.android.tools.build. What Maven would call the artifact ID is Gradle, and what Gradle would call it is name. And then the version number, the latest one I have is 1.2.3. Android Studio will highlight this and tell you if you have an older version number. It will offer to update it automatically. Now, this is the first thing that I personally have a little quibble with. Shouldn't it be called the Android plugin for Gradle, not the Gradle plugin for Android? But that's because we have people coming at this from both sides. So I would have called it Android here, but nevertheless, that's what we're doing. Now, there is the build script to say where to get the plugin. The other thing they put in here is in all projects, setting up the JCenter repository so that when you add your dependencies, you don't need to do anything in particular. If you can get your dependencies from JCenter, that'll work just fine. Okay, so let me close this. Oh, well, here is the app folder. And in the app folder, again, we have our build.gradle file. So if I open this guy up, you'll see the first line is the actual plugin being applied. So the plugin is called com.android.application, and that one makes sense to me. Okay, I get that. So this is largely just a copy and paste, but they start off with this, and I've never had to change that, although the plugins evolved over time. One time I had to change to the new coordinates, but now it seems fine. Now, down at the bottom, they put in a dependencies block, and because I think logically, because with Eclipse, there was no way to put in dependencies as a Maven style of download. In Eclipse, if you wanted to use additional jar files, you physically copied them into the libs folder yourself. There was no automatic way to do that. So here they're saying, if we have, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was off the bottom there. Let me know if I go down too far below. Let's see if I can resize this. to make sure I stay on the screen. Okay. Any rate, there is a file tree dependency on the libs folder, including any jars in it. The only change I ever make to this is sometimes I make that ** rather than just a single star. So in case for some weird reason I had nested folders or something, it would go down. I would sometimes go ** /star.jar, and that way it's like a expansion for however deeply they're nested, and it would find all the jars in there. I have to say though, since I've moved to this system, I don't think I've had to do this at all. I mean, it's good to know that it's there, and I generally don't remove it because it doesn't seem to hurt anything as long as the libs folder is empty. But I could remove this compile file tree and remove the libs folder, and I'd still be fine. Now here, they also have added in the support library for AppCompat version 7. One thing for those of you who are not as familiar with Android, when they say v7 here, they don't mean version 7 of the AppCompat library. They mean this has compatibility classes that take you back to Android version 7. See, there's also an AppCompat for version 13, I believe. Right, and you don't use both, you use one or the other. And they don't just have compatibility classes, they have other classes that Google, for one reason or another, has decided not to include in the base SDK, but you may be interested in. So that's automatically including the AppCompat library here with the latest version. Now, what the plugin does is it introduces the DSL that starts with the word Android. Now, as Luke Daly was talking about yesterday with the new configuration system, this whole block is eventually going to be inside a model block. But right now that's not going to happen, and my sense is that we've got time on this. Is that I would bet that a year from now when we meet again, then it might be something that we use on a regular basis, but that they're expecting significant modifications and changes of the new plugin for the better part of this year. So I'm going to stick with this process, and I think we're good for a little while, you know. So at any rate, the root element here is Android, and this is where you wind up putting in the compile SDK version. Now you may have noticed on the wizard, they didn't even ask me the compile SDK version. The older wizards used to ask that, now they don't anymore. They always assume you want the latest version of the SDK for the compiler. And you, in fact, you do actually, because the compiler is backward compatible. That doesn't restrict what you can develop. You always want the latest bug fixes on the compiler itself. The build tools version, this again is something that is a string, and it will warn you if you're a little out of date. It's always good to have the latest version of this, doesn't hurt anything. Where things start to get interesting is in the default config. This is where you pick your min SDK version. Now, one thing that has changed over the last year is that when we defined a package for our project, and you use the reverse URL notation, nowadays, I mean, back then we always called it package. And in the manifest, in the XML file, it was always package. Now it's called application ID. Now this string must be unique at the Google Play Store if you deploy to there. In the old Eclipse tools, it used to default to com.example.whatever, and that's kind of annoying because you can't deploy anything from com.example to the Google Play Store. That's actually restricted to Android samples, you know, which are good. So you notice on this tool, they prompt you for your domain name, they reverse the domain name, and then they add the name of the project at the end, and that hope is that that will be unique for you. If you try to release a new version of an app, then this is one of the things they're going to be matching on. Then the min SDK we mentioned. The target SDK they also used to prompt you for, and they don't anymore. This is the SDK version that you have basically promised you've tested on and are preparing for. And here they said 22, which again is the latest one. This one I might consider doing an older version on occasion. Now the version code and the version name are largely used for your own internal tracking, just a number and a version name. But the version code is something that the Google Play Store notices. They expect that to change when you deploy a new version of the same app, and they'll check that. I don't know that they do much with the version name, but the version code, they do expect you to increment that. Now, here is our build types section, and by default, there are two build types. There's a release type and there's a debug type. And you can make up your own just by putting in words. You know, just say the name of a word and it will automatically create it if it doesn't exist already. That too apparently is something that's going to change in the new model, but we're not there yet. Now what this one is saying is that in our current release version, we are not enabling minification, but if we were, the ProGuard files we would be using are the ones here, ProGuard-android.txt and ProGuard-rules.pro, and if you get comfortable with Groovy at all, you realize this is basically a method call with 2 arguments in it, with optional parentheses. So you see, you don't really have to know much Groovy at all to follow what's going on in this thing. When you get into regular Gradle builds and Java projects, people have a tendency to start customizing things, which of course is what Gradle's all about, right? I mean, Gradle kind of assumes every build is ultimately a custom build. And you wind up seeing a lot of Groovy code. In most Android projects, pretty much the configuration stage is what we live on. You know, we just tell it at this config stage, we're configuring objects here. Gradle involves a project class and a series of task class instances, and we're setting them all up. And here, everything that's being done is configuring those objects. We're not defining any new ones. Now, when it comes time to do that, then you'll see people go android.allVariants.each or whatever and start making changes. But you can actually do a lot just with this baseline build. Okay? All right, now I'm going to leave this and go to an already constructed couple of applications that I have, because I want to show you some examples. Actually, before I do that, let me show you how nicely Android Studio handles when you add a new dependency. Okay? So if I open one of the projects I plan to open, my good old ICNDB Android Studio app, I'll open it in a new window at the moment. And again, I'm going to have to remember to bring that up. Okay. Here is one of my dependencies. Let's say that I wanted to use Google's JSON library. Okay? And again, I'll come back in a minute to why I'm using it here, but I just wanted a sample. So say I want to use that. It's as soon as I hit enter in this file, Android Studio goes, wait a minute, the Gradle files have changed since the last project sync. Another project sync may be necessary for the IDE to work properly. Well, let me paste in my dependency. So there's the Google JSON library for parsing, converting JSON objects into Java classes and back again. As soon as I hit sync now, then a build process happens. And one of the interesting things about Android Studio, and this is different from Eclipse, is that basically this is one giant IDE, one giant user interface on top of Gradle. Everything that's happening here, from compilation to build to test to deployment, is actually calling Gradle tasks under the hood. So everything you do here, can you do it the command line? Absolutely. This just has a nice little GUI on top of it. But there is no separation between what can happen at the Gradle level and what's happening at the IDE level. So you saw a sync happened, and now if I go back to my project and look under external libraries, there's the JSON library built right in automatically. And that is a nice, nice feature, in my opinion. I mean, all you have to do is modify this file in any way, and Android Studio say, you want to sync now? And you say, absolutely. And if you forget, there's a sync now button, you know, sync project with Gradle build files, you know. So you can always get at that functionality. All right, let me close this project and explain what the next one's going to be like. Now, this one right here, async joke task, yes. Okay, this is basically a front end on a website. So let's see, where's my website here? Called icndb.com, the Internet Chuck Norris database. As in, Chuck Norris once ordered a Big Mac at Burger King and got one, you know. And there's an API here to give you Chuck Norris jokes. But of course, the reason I'm using it partly is for the humor, and partly because the size of the return JavaScript object notation object is very small, making it easy to map to. Now, I've mapped to very complex ones, but I want to, in here, I want to keep it very simple to show you how the example works. Here is the structure, type is success, value equals, there's an ID and a joke, time waits for no man unless that man is Chuck Norris, right? And they have an API. And you can specify the first and last name, which is what I'm going to do. I'll put Zav in there, or I'll put Hans Doctor or whatever. Maybe I should put Cedric in, except I can't get the E with the little accent on it, you know. So, any rate, you don't want to just get a random joke in a public forum, okay? They're not all really suitable for public consumption. But what I can do is limit them to nerdy. Okay, and that's much better. So that to give you an idea what this looks like, if I grab this just by itself and I paste it into my browser, and I'll also put in and first name equals, I'll use Cedric. I'll just have to leave off that special ampersand. And last name equals, oh great, all right, Champeau. Oh, I want brownie points for that, man. Okay. Nah, see, that's a Chuck Norris joke. Wait a minute, we got to fix that. He can instantiate interfaces. Okay, that's pretty good. See? But that's the structure of the JSON object I'm getting back. Very simple, but at least I can map to it. All right? So what I want to do is I want to access this website from a Google app, pull down the JSON object, parse it, extract the joke from it, and then update my user interface to show that. That's the plan. And one of the reasons I want to do this is partly because it's funny, but also because it lets me use a third-party library in my Gradle build that doesn't seem to get enough press from my point of view. I don't see it being used often enough. And that library is this thing called Spring for Android. Now, almost everybody probably has some familiarity with the Spring framework, right? I mean, probably the most widely used open source library in the Java ecosystem. This is not trying to put a Spring container on a handheld device. That's not its goal. If you want that, there's Google Juice. There are ways to do it. But what this has in it, if you look in the reference docs, let me just go to the reference docs here for the release version, is it has a REST template. And if you've ever used Spring MVC or done Spring with REST web services, you know about this REST template. It's a wonderful little client for RESTful web services. And it has, I'll show you the method I'm going to call in a minute. It's got the same message converters as those that come from Spring MVC. And the only other part of this thing is an authentication or authorization module built on the core. That's it. That's the whole Spring for Android. And it's designed for Android, so it's incredibly easy to use. So the piece I want is here. If I go to the GET requests, then what it says is if you call a method called getForObject, and you provide a URI with those little URI templates in it, the parts with the braces around it, and I supply values in there, I also have to supply a class that has a structure that maps to what the JSON structure looks like. And then when I call this method, then the REST template will download the JSON response and parse it and provide an instance of that class for me right away. So no monkeying around with JSON parsers, no working with the HTTP connection objects. You know, all that painful stuff is gone. And that to me is really worth it. And I don't know why people don't use it all the time. Of course, maybe they do. I just haven't run into those people. But it's possible. So with that in mind, here's my app. And in my app at the bottom, you'll see that I have added the Spring Android REST template in its release version and the Spring Android core. Now, I'm not sure whether it would have picked up the core as a transitive dependency or not, but they recommended adding it, so I added it. Also, when you use Spring's REST template, it asks you which library you want to use to do the conversion from the JavaScript into the Java. And they support Jackson, you know, the Jackson JSON library. But I'd still have to add that as a dependency. So instead, here's where I use Google's JSON parser, again, to convert from one to the other. And this will come up again when I show you about testing, how we're doing here. OK, I got about, what am I going to? We started. Oh, sorry. What time? 4. So I don't know, 10 minutes? Oh, great. All right. Well, then I'll show you all these things pretty quickly. I'll just run through them as a demonstration. So at any rate, there is the bottom line. And I also have the testing stuff, which I'll show you in a minute. Now, if I execute this application here, let me switch this to the app itself, and I will run it. Then it asks for an emulator or a connected device. I have 2 emulators running at the moment for reasons I'll show you in a minute here. And it's not the Chuck Norris database. Did you know that Chuck Norris's real name is Carlos Ray Norris? It's just Chuck is his nickname. I found that out when the lawyers contacted me about using the name Chuck Norris. So, any rate, here it's the Carlos Ray database now. And if I click on Get Joke, there you go. I'm using Hans, as you can see. Hans Doctor can access the database from the UI. Sure. There you go. Writes code that optimizes itself. That's a good one. All right. So that's how the app works. Is I'm actually just going to that site, downloading the string, parsing it, and putting it up here. And here is the code to actually do it. The code I'm using is under source main Java, and here is my main activity, and here is the class that maps to that JSON structure. So this is just type and joke, and inside joke is ID, joke, and categories. That's it. The rest is getters and setters. Okay? So I'll close that. Here's my rest. There's the URL I'm using, and then inside an asynchronous task in the do in background so that I get off the UI thread, there's my get for object, passing in first name and last name. Gives me back an instance, and I pull that out. That's all there is to it. Very, very simple exercise here. So there's that much. Now let me switch and show you some of the tests for this sort of thing. So I'm going to switch to my wait a minute, I have tests in this one already. So here's my tests under source Android test Java. Here's a class called a main activity test. And in this case, I'm using a different dependency called Robotium. Okay? Robotium allows you to drive the user interface with clicks and things like that. And it has a class in it called Solo. I always want to make the reference, Han or Hope. Hope might not be a good choice right now, or Soprano, something like that. But I use just Solo here. You set it up with the instrumentation and the activity, and then you see this is what happens. You go click on button, and then you search the text so you can find out what's going on. Now here's what the cool part is. Assuming I have all the dependencies set up, and I do, I want to run a Gradle test that runs this test on both of those emulators simultaneously. It'll run on all connected devices at the same time. Over here is a Gradle window which shows all the Gradle tasks, and there are, I think Zav mentioned, about 110 of them. Tons of these things. And I don't even have any variants or other than the build types. I don't have any special flavors going on. The connected check one is the one that I want to run in order to do this instrumentation or the integration test here. So I'm going to double click on that, and then you will see that it's cranking its way through, and once it gets to the debug test, which it looks like we're there, let me go to the emulators and watch how it's going to run both emulators and all the tests simultaneously. And then when I come back here, I can actually look at the output under build outputs, build reports, Android tests, and here's index.html. I will open in a browser, and you can see the generated report ran two tests on 2 devices. If I had a plugged-in device, that would work as well. This is organized by test. This is organized by device. And all that happened automatically. Really nice. Okay? Because time is short, let me now switch and show you the Espresso version of the same thing. Oh, I've got a local branch called Espresso. This is all going to be in my GitHub repository as soon as I update it. I'll have to do a new sync because it's using different dependencies to do Espresso here. And what you'll see here, and by the way, you can see it running through all these pieces with the assemble, debug, and everything. The build looks different now. The build has the Android support annotations, com.android.support test runner and Espresso. And then also I had to say use the Android JUnit runner for the test instrumentation. And that means now I can run my main activity test as simply on view with ID for the button, perform a click, and then on view with ID of the text view, check that it matches with text, contains string Hans. See? Now this one I can do basically the same thing. The only difference is, and then let me run it, is that this one does not seem to be running simultaneously, although I can't prove that. I don't know whether it's doing them consecutively or not. Did it run? Yeah, we're up to it now. I'm probably going to miss it. At any rate, it seems to run one and then the other, but it's not like these are exactly complicated or difficult tests. See, there was the first one, and then there should be something that flashes by that'll be the second one as well. Yep, there it goes. And again, I can go back to my test here and refresh and everything. This time I only had the one test in there. That works fine as well. Okay? The last thing I want to show you, and then I can hang out for questions or whatever, is I want to show you something about flavors as well. So first of all, let me switch to a different, I'm sorry, one more thing before I leave that. A new thing they have in the Gradle build now is the ability to actually handle true unit tests. This is a lot less cool than it sounds, though. They do not emulate the Android system. That's Roboelectric. Okay? Instead, they just say if you just want to do a regular old JUnit test on something that does not require Android in any way, you can do that. And you'll see here I have a source test Java folder with a test of that joke class so that I hardwired in a JSON string. And I just ran through JSON to catch it. And what you'll notice, and really the reason I'm bringing this up, is that down here in my build variants section, if I was to switch to unit tests, then that would become available and I could run it as a regular old JUnit test, and that works as well. It's still completely separate from the rest, though. Okay, so it's got some utility, but if I needed to do anything inside the Android system, I'd have to mock that myself in order to use it. Okay, so I want to say that is in there now, but I'm not, notice it's not even acting as though it's a source folder yet until I switch this to unit tests, at which point it goes, oh, this must be a test folder, and now the old ones aren't anymore. The Android test isn't anymore. See, so that's the sort of thing you deal with. Okay, now what about the flavors? Here is a project called Hello World Android Studio. I'll just use this window again. And in this one, I have a block called Product Flavors, where I have arrogant, friendly, and obsequious. This one you're going to put in, isn't that a good word? I've wanted to use that for years, you know. You put in a name, and then you're going to get a greeting, like hello, name, okay? So here I have variants, and in the variants, I have a whole series of them based on the combination of the build types and the product flavors. Arrogant, debug, friendly, obsequious, etc. So I'll pick we'll start with the arrogant debug, and let me run this. And this app has a lot more meat to it. This is the mother of all Hello World apps, I like to think, you know, because I've really stuffed a bunch of stuff in here. Here's the arrogant one, and I'll put in Andre, right? There you go. And I'll say hello, and it says, His or Her Royal Highness, we condescend to acknowledge your presence, if just barely, Andre. And there is my image, see? And then I've got this nice little thing down here, and I can click on something, and I've got alerts, and I could register positive and negative. I'm telling you, this is the mother of all Hello World apps, you know? But I'll tell you about it later. At any rate, that's the first one. I even got a notification in there, and that will take me back to the root here. Okay, now let me switch to the friendly debug and run that one on the same emulator, I guess. Come on, you can do it. Okay, I was just waiting for it to pop up which emulator to run on. And then that'll come up and, well, I'll put in Cedric again because you're friendly with Cedric. And there we go. See, we're BFFs. There's Cedric. Okay. Again, I've got this thing working where I can just switch back on the notification. And finally, on the obsequious one, and then I could run this. Again, I could have done this from the Gradle build. And there we go. So let's, who should I put it? Well, I'll put in Zob for that, right? You know, say hi, and I had to put in Dobby, right? Oh, great Zob, please accept this pathetic greeting from my unworthy self. I grovel in your general direction. Okay. Now, the part you don't know, and what's interesting, is that how does this actually work inside my project structure? I have a separate folder for arrogant resource values, and there's the animal PNG, and the same thing under friendly. Let's get this out of the way. Res. And there's my drawable, and I'd have the same thing for obsequious. That's just down at the bottom. See, so let me close up the main one here. And all I'm doing is that each of these animals is a different picture, just with the same name. And all of the strings are the same file, just with a different greeting in them. See, there's one, and there's another, and there's the third. See, that sort of thing? So whichever build type I pick, that's the resource it's using. Now, they say flavors are for things like paid versus free, which implies you can also change Java versions, and you can, but you have to be careful with that because you can get conflicts. Java, you have to basically not have one in main and have the same class in each of the flavors and make sure that you have the same methods available. It's a little bit more work, but you can merge that. But the strings and the images, this is easy. So I think of flavors as an easy way to, say, put a skin on an app for a different client. You know, I have one for one client or one for another or one from a third. That seems to be a very useful mechanism that you might want to take advantage of. You can merge the manifest too. Again, there's complex rules in how that works, having additional activities or services and so on. Okay, so those are all the major things I wanted to show you. Let me at least run through what's here, just to give you an idea what's in the slides here, and then I can call it. And there's the link for the Android Studio. That's the business about the build scripts section. Here is the latest version of the dependency. We specify version code and name. We have our multi-project build with the build.gradle and the settings. We have a debug and release build. They both go in the build types, and you could modify it. Now, one thing I didn't do is if I put some customization on the package names, like put a suffix on them, I could have had the Gradle build all of them, all 6 of them, or 8 of them actually, because I had 3 flavors and 2 build types. I could have had to generate all APKs simultaneously, all of them. Then you have your source main, source debug, source release. You have different folders based on the build types and folders based on, same thing here. So the resource types just take their counterparts, but the Java classes conflict. You have to be careful. And then flavors, you again have a separate source tree on all of those to make that work. To do the release, one of the things you would notice if we had time, but I'll just tell you now, is that you don't have an install release task until you have a signing configuration, because it doesn't know how to sign it. So I actually used Java's key tool and generated a signature. I've got my little wizard right here and showed everything with the password and all of that, and then pasted it right in here for my, Gradle rules and Carlos Ray, aka Chuck. And that's, once I pasted that into my Gradle build file, now I have an install release as well as an install debug on that one. You don't have to put the passwords there. They can be on the command line. They could be in a separate file, but here for this, I just wired it in. You specify where the release config is in the build file, and you're all set. You could do a signing report as a Gradle task to find out what the configuration is. Okay, and that's enough of that. And then the testing I mentioned with Android Test. And you run, the one I ran was connected check, will run simultaneously on all connected devices. And flavors and variants I mentioned, I put in my 3. You get all these APKs out of it. So that's enough. And then here's some links on all these different things so that you can get to them. And I will update the slides on the website with these slides, again, after the presentation. I'm sorry I ran a little bit over. I will hang out if there's any questions. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming. Any questions, comments? There was one there, and then I'll come back to you. Yes, sir.
Is there a fundamental difference between the Android Studio IDE versus the IntelliJ?
Yeah, the question is Android Studio that different from the Android plugin for IntelliJ? And the answer is eventually they wind up syncing up. But the Android Studio one is always the latest and greatest. That's the one they're working on all the time. So all the changes go in there first. When IntelliJ releases a new version, eventually Android Studio will release a new version that takes all the changes and wraps it in. And eventually the stuff from Android Studio will make it back into the Android plugin. I would recommend downloading and using Android Studio for Android, even if you already have an IntelliJ license, because it keeps them nicely separate and you'll always have the latest and greatest. But you can do almost everything the same way in IntelliJ. Okay? Yes, sir, you had a question?
So what's the difference between connected check and connected Android test?
Connected Android test runs fewer things than connected check. I don't remember the actual details. Connected check will ultimately call connected Android test. It just does some additional setup work. Okay, that was the difference between connected check and connected Android test, just mentioning for the video. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Is it possible to localize Android applications
Can you localize Android apps with flavors? You don't generally need to use flavors for that. They already have localization built right in. In fact, when you saw when I opened up one of the string files here, just strings.xml, it says edit translations for all locales in the translations editor. I could simply add values underscore, RU or DE or whatever, and wind up putting in my strings file and all of those, and then the device will detect which locale we're in and use that automatically. So you don't need to do that with flavors. That's a fundamental feature of Android from the beginning. Okay? Any other questions? Well, great. Thank you very much again, and I'll see you around in the conference. Okay. Yeah, we got it. Okay, take care.